Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 798 for the 21st of January 2024. Richard Saunders coming to you from the renovated, updated, overhauled, regenerated Skeptic Zone studio in the corner of the room with new sound paneling. And for those of you of a technical mind, I'm using the Sennheiser shotgun microphone today. Coming up on this week's show, the return of Adrienne Hill. I wonder where she went. You'll find out. You'll find out on this week's show. In fact, here's a big spoiler. Adrienne went to Southern California to visit the Winchester Mystery House. And what a fascinating place this is. And Adrienne has been doing very important work with this, well, quite frankly, tourist attraction, uncovering the real story of its owner. And it is not the tale of seances and superstitions that people have been led to believe. Now, many years ago, I had the great pleasure of visiting Susan Gobeck, and we went. She took me to the Winchester Mystery House, this rambling mansion with stairs that go nowhere and strange rooms and all sorts of things. Included in this report, Adrienne does an interview on the spot and talks about her roundtable discussion with her fellow investigators. And you can see that roundtable discussion by following the link in this week's show notes. After that, I review some news that's come my way from New Zealand, the land of the long white cloud and the ridiculous COVID-19 conspiracy theorists. Well, sadly, they're all over the world. What have they been up to, and who's going to prison? Find out with the report about anti-vaxxers in New Zealand. And then it's Adrienne Hill once again to read the newsletter from the Australian Skeptics. What's caught the eye of Tim Mendham this week? Then to round off the show, it's part one of a two-part series on Trove, with Trove, looking at reports of alternative medicine. And after that 2-week series, we're going to start a series looking at mediums, psychics, clairvoyance. Now, some of you may have heard that the last week here in Sydney, and I think in many parts of Australia, has been unusually hot and muggy, especially the muggy part. It's been extraordinary. I've never known the humidity in Sydney to be quite this bad for a prolonged period. You have to modify your daily life in a way. So I envy those people who maybe can be by the ocean, take lovely walks on the beach and feel that cool sea breeze. Like those lucky people who are on the Surf Coast down there in Victoria, and soon we'll be getting ready for Skepticamp. As we mentioned last week on the show, the Surf Coast Skepticamp 2024 will be at Aireys Inlet, a beautiful, beautiful place, on Saturday the 24th of February. And you're all welcome to go. If you want to find out more, just follow the link in this week's show notes. A shout out to Brian Dunning. Just yesterday, Brian did an hour's worth of Q&A on his YouTube channel about the UFO movie They Don't Want You to See. And I was very pleased to be acting as moderator on that chat. And I'm equally pleased to say that that movie has now racked up 360,000 views in 3 short weeks. A great effort, Brian. A great result, maybe I should say. And if you haven't seen that movie, I suggest you do. Just go to skepticzone.tv, scroll down just a little bit, see the picture of Michelle Bickersma, who does the wonderful logical fallacies, and just under her picture you'll find the link to the UFO movie They Don't Want You to See. And all I can say is they are failing because many people are seeing the movie. Well, that's enough for me at the moment. It's time for me to run downstairs and have that cup of coffee on a hot, sweltering day. For those of you in Australia, today will be, in Sydney at least, I think the forecast is 33, which isn't outrageously hot, but coupled with high humidity, Anyway, while I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. You can count on Adrienne with Adrienne Hill.
Hello everyone, this is Adrienne Hill back at cold Skookum Studios after returning from a fantastic trip to Salinas, California, where I spent a wonderful week with Susan Gerbic, many friends from Weekly Trivia, and fellow skeptics from the area. I was there to participate in the Monterey Bay Skepticamp, which was held on January 6th, to talk about Tourette syndrome and OCD, and the Winchester Mystery House. I became quite familiar with the lore of the Mystery House when I rewrote both the Winchester Mystery House and Sarah, or Sally, Winchester's page over the last year and a half. And the more I researched, the angrier I became with all the misinformation around the story of the woman and her house. For those of you who don't know much or have not heard of the Winchester Mystery House, the house was built by the widow of William Wirt Winchester, of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company fame. She was reported to have moved to California after the deaths of several family members because of advice from a Boston medium who told her she needed to build a house to appease the ghosts of those the Winchester rifles killed and to never stop building or she would die. Winchester died in 1922, and only 9 months later, the house was opened as a tourist attraction and has remained open ever since. The tours and many articles portray Sally as crazy and superstitious, since the house has stairs to nowhere and doors that open to walls, with a maze-like construction. But there are reasonable explanations for all of these oddities in the house. And Sally was a strong, intelligent woman. In my opinion, the truth is far more interesting than the lore. Also, you can hear a report given by Richard Saunders about the house on the Skeptic Zone, episode number 571 from September 2019. The day after the Skepticamp, a large group of us attended tours of the house. It turned out to be fun, fascinating, and rewarding. And it was long past due for me. Most of the people who attended had actually been on the tour before. The first tour we went on was the Spirit Tour, where we were supposed to experience a séance and possibly spooky happenings. The second tour was a general house tour that focused more on history, but still certainly delved into and promoted the lore. After the tours, we went to a nearby restaurant and talked about our thoughts on the tour. At the end of this segment, you will hear an interview that I did with Morgan McCaw at this location. And to finish off our day, a group of us landed at Susan Gerbic's dining room table and chatted some more. At first, there was just a few of us, including Karen Araujo, who lives just down the street from Susan in Salinas, Jane Selke from Eugene, Oregon, Cindy Clark from Pacific Grove, which is about 30 minutes from Salinas, and, of course, Susan, who decided to film our discussion. If you want to watch the full discussion, full of giggles and more people joining later, please visit the link in the show notes. Karen, because Karen is the only person who took notes on our tour, and I wish I had thought of it myself. What kind of notes did you take down?
The notes I took were questions I had, things I wanted to know more about.
I was particularly impressed with Karen, who took notes during the tours about the many bothersome, or in her words, niggly things she noticed on the tour. One niggly was the misuse of the word guttural. Our spirit tour guide kept describing the guttural feelings he often had that ghosts were watching him or were up to some shenanigans. In Karen's words, quoting the Princess Bride, quote, "You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means," end quote.
I don't think that word means what you think it means. But I didn't say that. That was my inside voice.
I think we had a lot of inside voices happening today.
Yes.
One positive of the tours was the discussion and display of the William Mumler spirit photos. At first, the guide talked as if Mumler really did capture ghosts in photographs, but eventually did admit that the photos were produced using double exposures. But the next niggly for all of us was something none of us had ever heard of before. We learned about residual spirits. And these residual spirits could be encountered at the Mystery House, and they result from living people. Yes, I actually said living people. Apparently, people can leave an imprint of themselves in places like a tape playing over and over. He gave the example of people hearing him, the tour guide, speaking or seeing him at the house when it was his day off. I can imagine if this was really the case, security at an airport could get quite interesting. The last niggle I will discuss centered around the number 13. Both tours expressed Sally's apparent love of the number 13, including stairs, windows, bathrooms, hooks, candles on a chandelier, etc. Morgan and I counted many of the staircases. One had 13. All the many others had different numbers of stairs. In one instance, the guide told us to notice how the next set of stairs to the next floor had 13 steps, which was technically wrong. There was one large landing step to go down that made it 14 stairs. So if you don't step down off the landing, there are indeed only 13 steps. But then you would be stuck on the staircase. There was also a room that had 13 hooks, but the previous room had 5 hooks and was ignored. The seance on the spirit tour was rather silly and disappointing. When the advertising stated we got to experience a seance, I thought we would all sit around a table and encounter a person playing a medium. Instead, all that happened was we got to stand around a table in a dimly lit room while a recording played, asking us to close our eyes and connect with the spirits. The only exciting thing about the seance was when Susan started kicking the table to make it move. It was fun. And all of us found it strange when we entered an unfinished room how they showcased a person named Mary Hayes Chenoweth, who was a contemporary of Sally's and who actually was an active spiritualist and self-proclaimed psychic medium. The implication the tour guide gave was that because one was a spiritualist, the other most likely was as well, simply because they were contemporaries and spiritualism was popular at the time. Jane made a really astute statement. She said, quote, "Both tours were based on a lot of making something out of nothing. I feel like the foundation of the entire tour was, how can we create a tour and make it last for over an hour? There was a lot of pointing out all these little odd nooks and crannies. One example is near the end in one of the final rooms where there was a cabinet, and there was nothing particularly odd about it in my mind. But she said, why did she build this cabinet? It's up to you to decide. It's just very odd. And many people think it was done to confuse the spirits." And I thought to myself, well, maybe she just had a purpose that she was wanting to utilize it for. Maybe she had a bunch of towels she wanted to put in it. Or maybe she had a bunch of china. It's not that hard to come up with reasons. Why would we need to jump to the idea that she needed to confuse the spirits as the primary possibility when there are infinite possibilities? End quote. Well said, Jane.
Hello, this is Adrienne Hill, not from Skepticamp Studios. I'm actually in San Jose right now, and we just finished going through the Winchester Mystery House. We did 2 tours. We first of all did a spirit tour, and then we did the house tour. And I'm joined here today with one of the participants who actually was at Skepticamp yesterday as well. Asked some great questions, by the way. And can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Morgan McCaw. I'm a resident of Aptos, California, and I'm a scientist.
Awesome. And what did you think about the tour after my talk? Did you find that it was as spooky as you were expecting?
No, it wasn't very spooky, and I was a little underimpressed by the things I'd heard about, like stairs going to nowhere and dead ends and things that didn't make much sense. They had like a few cabinet doors in front of a wall. It wasn't the maze I've been led to believe.
Yeah, the house is quite a maze in respect to narrow hallways winding around.
Yeah.
They advertise it as having a lot of stairs going to nowhere. I saw one.
Yeah, most of them went somewhere. It was just, they obviously added on and added on and added on, and from that you get a big mess, but...
Exactly. And I think one of the things that I thought was really fun is at the very end of the tour, you told the tour guide something. Can you tell the listeners what that was?
Yeah, I mentioned to you that you should tell her that you wrote the Wikipedia page, and it looked like you were going to, but then you decided not to.
Correct.
And I thought, okay, well, that was enough that I can wait until pretty much everybody else is gone and say, by the way, the person who wrote the Wikipedia page for the Winchester Mystery House was on this tour. She instantly had a reaction. Basically, it seemed like she knew that there was some sort of background to this, that there was maybe someone there that was not happy about the Wikipedia page. And she said something to the effect of, well, I hope she can include some of the stuff that she learned on this tour, some of the facts. And then did say something about opinion. I can't exactly recall how it went, but...
Yeah, because on the Wikipedia talk page, somebody from the Winchester Mystery House had posted that what I wrote on the Wikipedia page was my opinion and not based on facts. So I thought that was really funny, that's actually the words that she used when she replied to you.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I think we were really pleased that she didn't seem to really be a believer. Did you have that sense?
Yeah, I think she did a good job. She even did say that they have tried to change the tour to be less about, these mystery ghost stories and more about historical things. They may have some things they could do to improve the historical accuracy of their pitch, but
yes.
Our tour guide was really good. I think she did a great job.
Yeah.
And there were times when she said, like, this was probably this, or it could have been because she was contacting mediums, and it had a little sarcastic bent to it a little bit.
Very much a sarcastic bent.
But
yeah.
Playful.
Very, very playful, and she had a lot of may in there, like it may have been, and I did pick up on her really focusing on, they wanted it to be more about history. So I'm hoping there's a transitional stage happening, because I think it is a wonderful house. So thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I hope you enjoyed hearing about my California adventure and learning about Sally Winchester and her house. Don't forget to check out the Wikipedia pages to learn more about this amazing woman and the mystery house that never was. A link is in this week's show notes. And I want to thank all those who attended the Skepticamp and tours. It was such fun meeting so many new people and old friends. Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill.
Hello, everyone out there. Thank you for coming to our service.
Yes.
We are ready to heal you. We are Ross and Carrie. We are faith healers. Yes, you there.
Yes, sir. You have a spirit of...
not listening to enough podcasts.
We have the solution for that.
Oh, we can cure you.
You should listen to Oh No, Ross and Carrie. Hallelujah. It's on Maximum Fun.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you there. Gladys.
A spirit of boredom?
Oh my goodness, we have the solution for you. It is to listen to the podcast,
Oh No, Ross and Carrie.
Now here's a story that caught my attention in the last couple of days, as reported at news.com.au. Anti-vaxxer Roger Blake jailed for selling, wait for this, bleach as COVID-19 cure in New Zealand. An anti-vaxxer who called himself, quote, human man, end quote. Sounds like a sovereign citizen. Sold people what he describes as a miracle cure for COVID-19 and has been jailed for it. And this is credited to Parks Hupton. The story goes on to say a New Zealand anti-vaxxer has been jailed for selling more than $100,000 worth of an industrial bleach as a miracle cure for COVID-19. Roger Blake, who describes himself as a human man, was sentenced to just over 10 months in prison after being found guilty at trial of 29 charges in the Hamilton District Court. Now, I seem to remember in the last few years hearing some stories about bleach. Was it former President Trump who was advocating bleach or was talking about bleach or injecting bleach? Listeners might be able to remember that. I seem to remember something about that. Blake advertised and sold Miracle Mineral Solution, MMS, products, claiming it could treat, prevent and cure coronavirus. However, New Zealand's Ministry of Health had not approved the product. Well, hardly surprising, and detailed that when ingested became chlorine dioxide, a bleach commonly used for water treatment, bleaching textiles and paper. The court heard Blake had marketed the product as a cure in New Zealand from the start of the pandemic between December 2019 and December 2020. MedSafe, M-E-D, MedSafe, the Health Ministry Safety Authority, said Blake's company had sales of, in New Zealand dollars, with sales spiking in March when the country was placed in lockdown. The judge said Blake had seized upon the tragedy of the pandemic for financial gain. And we have an example here of what we presume was some of his propaganda. Is that the right word? Advertising. Restoring Health is the logo. Restoring Health to the World. Genesis 2. Church of Health and Healing. The truth about COVID-19 and chlorine dioxide. Fact, chlorine dioxide kills COVID-19. Oh dear. And this flyer or this screen grab says, while the fake news mainstream media continue claiming that there is no evidence that chlorine dioxide kills COVID-19, and liars like Professor Susie Viles, who is a wonderful woman. I know Susie. I met her at a Skeptics convention, a champion of science and reason, and a target for the anti-vaxxer conspiracy wackos out there, while she warned against the false claim that disinfectants like bleach could be used to cure COVID-19 in humans. I will link to this story in the show notes. It lists some products that they were selling. It said that the website which sold MMS in New Zealand was registered to a US-based organization, Genesis 2, Church of Health and Healing. And then at the end it says here, the Therapeutics Goods Administration in Australia also issued $151,000 worth of fines to a company advertising MMS in Australia in May 2020. And another story from New Zealand, and I was alerted to this by my friend Dr. Brad Mackay, a very skeptical GP indeed. And this is also reported in news.com.au, and this relates to a few days ago. We have the story of former New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern getting married. However, as reported here, protesters shared a picket sign with "Lest we forget jab mandates" spray painted on it. And there's another picture here. Police were seen speaking to two men who had gathered outside the entrance of the property. A group of 4 women were also seen in the area of the wedding, one carrying a sign which read, "This S ... is bananas." Okay. While another carried a boombox sprouting anti-vaccination material. The group then set up outside the gates with dozens of corflute signs containing anti-vaccination material. They raised their signs as attendees began to stream through the gates. Video posted on social media by one protester shows. And how sad is that these conspiracy theorists thought it was worth picketing and protesting and making a nuisance of themselves at the wedding of Jacinda Ardern. What a strange world we live in, my friends. What a strange world we live in. We have these people who are so convinced they're utterly right. And it really is, for many people, it really is a crusade. I think it's the best way to describe it. And when you're on a crusade, nothing matters. Nothing else matters. Your topic, whatever you're crusading on, is the most important topic. And therefore, that justifies you doing all sorts of, what shall we say, extreme action. Or even just making yourself a bloody nuisance. And there we are, some news from across the ditch, as they say, the water, the part of the Pacific Ocean which separates Australia and New Zealand is often just called the ditch. And a big shout out to all our good friends in New Zealand, the New Zealand Skeptics, who do a wonderful job. And we shared a convention with them just a short couple of years ago, which was a huge success. And to my New Zealand listeners, I do look forward to the day I set my foot back in your wonderful country. Hopefully to scare off the conspiracy theorists.
Hi everyone, this is Susan Gerbic from Psychics Explained. That's the YouTube channel where we discuss and analyze in great depth all those people who say that they can speak to the dead, all those readings, how they look like they're actually communicating with people. Why do people fall for this? There's a reason. It's much more complicated than you would think. Come to my channel, watch our videos. We would love to have you become part of our conversation. Just visit us on YouTube at Psychics Explained or Psychic Sex Planed on YouTube.
Happy New Year, everybody. This is Adrienne Hill from a cold Skookum Studios in Calgary, Canada, for another year of highlights from the Australian Skeptics Newsletter. And for the new year, we have new background music. Don't forget, you can subscribe to this newsletter and get it delivered to your inbox every other week, complete with links to all the stories. Just go to skeptics.com.au to sign up. This is newsletter number 189 for the third week of January 2024. But now, let's see what Tim Mendham has for us this time. Hi all, says Tim. We're back and we hope you had a good break. If you had one. As for now, the traditional silly season over the Christmas period has put forth a multitude of weird and wonderful stories. So this newsletter is chock full of items to amaze and amuse you. Read on, Tim. Okay, Tim, I'll do just that. And I will read on with some anticipated giggles happening from the sounds of it. Skeptical conventions and skeptical groups. The 20,923rd Australian Skeptics Convention, or Skepticon, held in Melbourne in December, went off swimmingly. Somehow, I think that is a typo. But I just had to read it as it says. I'm going to guess that what it should say is, the 2023 Australian Skeptics Convention, or Skepticon, held in Melbourne in December, went off swimmingly. a report will be in the March 2024 issue of The Skeptic. Skepticon 2024 will be the 40th in the continuous series of our conventions, and it will be held in Sydney at a date and venue to be announced, and it's most likely going to be held in mid-November. And the organizers of the US PsyCon are seeking suggestions on topics, themes, and speakers for their event in October. You can write to Barry Carr, Executive Director of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, at bcarr@centerforinquiry.org. And that's bkarr@centerforinquiry.org. The UFO movie they don't want you to see. Brian Dunning's feature-length indie documentary film is now available on YouTube and Tubi. In an age when misinformation, alternative facts, and conspiracy theories have become mainstream, UFOs have risen to become one of the most talked about pop culture phenomena. With all of this noise, how can we expect anyone to know how much of this is true? What is in our skies? What do we know, and how do we know it? And most importantly, are we being visited? Quote, "Science does have most of these answers, and we're working on answering the rest of them." End quote. This fascinating and award-winning 90-minute doco is a must for all skeptics, and it's free. Peru authorities blast extraterrestrial mummies. Flavio Estrada, a forensic archaeologist at the Public Ministry's Institute of Legal Medicine, warned that, quote, "pseudoscience is distorting the history," end quote, of Peru. Quote, "Our ancient civilizations built the Inca shrine of Machu Picchu and the Nazca lines. They did not need alien help," end quote. And seeing the cute little costumes believers are dressing the dummy mummies in would make you dismiss them purely on the grounds of bad taste. Key to fighting pseudoscience is empathy. Evidence shows that shoving data in people's faces doesn't work to change minds. It's an interesting, if long, article on the nature of pseudoscience and the concept of radical empathy. Quote, "Empathy given to another person without any expectation of receiving it back in return," end quote. Psychologists' view on astrology. Oh dear. Quote, "Through psychological research, we are able to delve into the intricate motivations that drive astrology believers, seeking to understand why individuals ardently adhere to this age-old practice and uncover insights on how to identify them," end quote. This article gives you a 24-point list of how to spot an astrology believer, though many of these tend to say the same thing, but in different words. Survey reveals 76% believe in psychic powers. This seems like a high number, except way down the bottom, you read that the survey is open to voluntary contributions online, which might indicate that the results are a little bit biased towards those with a predisposition to such things, and who can be bothered submitting responses. How UFO activists and ghost hunters duped U.S. Congress. This is an excellent and detailed overview of the alien and paranormal industry. It's a compilation program of Stephen Greenstreet's investigations, and it's well worth dipping into. The whole thing, though, will take you close to 4 hours. The December 2023 issue of The Skeptic is out. It looks at some famous or infamous UFO and haunting claims, including an in-depth look at the recent, quote, "I've not seen dead alien bodies, but I know they're there," end quote, kerfuffle. Plus, a whole lot more. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time to do so. You can sign up for a hard copy or digital edition, or both, since the digital is offered free to those who take up the hard copy version. Contact the editor if you're not sure if your existing subscription needs renewing. Items of interest: alien invasions and visitations. This video covers a fairly interesting discussion of pop culture, weirdness, and paranormal claims from a couple of guys who are investigators of UFO phenomena. Enough skepticism to make it worth watching, if you have 50 minutes to spare. World's oldest pyramid in Indonesia? This is unlikely to be part of a previously unknown ancient civilization. It's more likely a hill. Several archaeologists have aired their concerns publicly, saying a study by a colleague promoting the pyramid theory is, quote, not worthy of publication, end quote, and that the geologists claim that it was built by humans, quote, just doesn't make sense, end quote. Horror films and belief in the paranormal. A psychology of popular media study has revealed that viewers' belief in the paranormal can be influenced by their viewing of horror films and videos. According to Femke Jussens, a postdoctoral fellow at Uppsala University, his research focuses on the effects of media on our perceptions and interactions with the world. We might add, however, that perhaps viewers' predisposition to the paranormal might influence what they watch rather than the other way around. Language barriers to spirit communication. Addressing the linguistic barrier in ghost hunting is an often overlooked aspect of paranormal investigations. If you're in the UK, for instance, and your ghost dates to the 12th century or before, then they are going to be speaking Old English. That's assuming the ghost comes from Britain in the first place. A Viking ghost might just rattle off Old Danish or whatever, not to mention more recent foreign ring-ins. And do pre-colonial First Nations Australian ghosts speak an Aboriginal language, or have they kindly learned English, a language that was never here in their time? Maybe your EVP recorder needs a built-in translator. Personally, I'd like to see a ghost from the 1970s doing disco. Funnest product of the week: cryptid bobbleheads. Oh, I think I need to get one of those. The U.S. National Bobblehead Hall of Fame has issued a series of 8 cryptid bobbleheads. These are potential Christmas presents, if you can think that far ahead. Personally, we don't know who Goatman is, and sadly, there's no Yowie. So if you want an Aussie flavor, you might have to stick a hat with corks hanging down onto Bigfoot. Silliest story of the week: Clash of the Believers. A former psychic who repented of occult practices after turning to Jesus Christ warned that Fox News potentially opened its viewers to demonic activity by airing an act of divination during prime time last week. To be specific, tarot card reading. Go get 'em, we say, to both sides. Other silliest story of the week: conspiracy theorists say Challenger astronauts didn't die. Oh dear. Conspiracy theorists believe the Challenger astronauts never really got into the space shuttle in the first place. They say the Challenger disaster was a hoax orchestrated to induce some kind of massive trauma across the population. Why? We're not quite sure. But experts respond by saying that the conspiracists are unable to accept that bad things happen to good people. Well, that is the end of another mind-bending, logic-twisting, and giggle-inducing edition of the newsletter. As we kick off the new year, let's raise a toast to both reason and contagious giggles. Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill extending warm wishes from a cold place for a happy new year, eh?
Hejsan alla svenskar som lyssnar på The Skeptic Zone podcast. Det här är Pontus Böckman från The ESP, The European Skeptics Podcast. När ni har lyssnat klart på alla inslag och intervjuer här på The Skeptic Zone så kanske ni har lust att kolla vad som händer på The ESP. Ni hittar oss på theesp.eu där man finner skeptiska nyheter och inslag ur ett europeiskt perspektiv. Vi ses där!
Now it's time once again to take a running jump and dive into the digital archives at Trove, supplied to us by those hard-working people at the National Library of Australia, thanks to the Australian government for digitising millions of articles of Australian history. How important is this? It is so important that these records are available for everybody and they're being kept and digitised so people like me, people like you and me, can spend many happy hours looking through the history of Australian media in print. And of course, we also look further afield to such institutions as state libraries, especially the State Library of New South Wales, the keepers of many more recent Sydney Morning Herald archives, for example. And this week, sort of following on from last week where we talked about the TV and radio doctor, Dr. James Wright, from the late 70s and the early 80s, we're going to look once more at various sort of random references to alternative medicine. And we land in the year 1982 on Sunday the 31st of January. A needle in time can prevent pain. And this is a column called Family Doctor. Acupuncture, the ancient Chinese treatment in which needles are pushed into the body, defied an explanation until now. It seems potent pain-killing chemicals are produced by the brain and account for the magical relief that occurs. Alternative medicine is becoming increasingly popular. Acupuncture is among the avant-garde, and many have already found incredible relief. In fact, more and more Australian doctors are attending special courses and workshops in Hong Kong, China, and classes are also being held in Australia. The basic idea is that symptoms are due to a temporary breakdown in the normal flow of energy. Of course they are. This occurs along special lines throughout the body, termed meridians. Located on these unseen lines are special areas called acupuncture points. I think I mentioned this with the writings of Dr. James Wright. Whoever wrote this, don't they even stop to think? 1982. We read on. An enormous number of points have been determined. In fact, many hundreds of them, although the doctor usually employs probably 100 or less in everyday therapy. A very fine needle is inserted into the appropriate point. Treatment may be repeated daily or several times a week. In many cases, within a few days, symptoms start to ease. Imagine that. In fact, in some instances, such as a severe bout of asthma or a migraine headache, benefits may be felt within minutes. It has an enormous number of applications. These usually involve relief from pain, although other symptoms are also amenable. Pains from arthritic joints, pain in the back, whether it be from torn muscles, disc disorders, or any other reason, often respond dramatically to treatment. Period pains, abdominal disorders, and muscular disabilities can often be relieved. Since the advent of radioimmunoassay, minute traces of chemicals can now be picked up in the body. Hormones called endorphins and enkephalins are produced almost at once when the acupuncture needles are inserted and stimulated. These two very powerful hormones, called endogenous opiates, resemble opium or its derivative, morphine, in effect. The hormones are claimed to be 100 times more powerful in their pain-killing effect. Working on the pain centers of the brain, they simply knock out the appreciation of pain. They also seem to work in a similar way in relieving other symptoms. If you want to try acupuncture, please be referred to a doctor specially trained in this expert field. It does not work every time. No form of therapy ever does, but it may prove useful for many patients. Now, let's see, that was 1982. So over 40 years ago, you think they would have had enough time now to demonstrate that it actually works. And now we go to the year 1983 on the 28th of November. The 28th of November. And this is from the Sydney Morning Herald, and it says, Television Notebook, an article by Catherine Sparks. I wonder if she's a distant relative. Some of my early relatives in Australia were called Sparks or Parks. You may be familiar, Australian listeners, with the name Sir Henry Parkes. He was a great uncle or a distant cousin or something like that. Anyway, I digress. Television Notebook. Alternative medicos just love you to talk. One of the strongest impressions made on the ABC's new series on alternative medicine, Healers, Quacks or Mystics, that replaces Encounters on Thursday nights, was the alternative look at the practitioners, not 1/3 generation grandee among them. Now, this is interesting. In 1983, I was still in high school. There was a TV show called Healers, Quacks or Mystics. I wonder if there's any lingering evidence or examples of that show. And a quick search online brings us to screenaustralia.gov.au, a government website. Healers, Quacks or Mystics 1983 documentary. 6 30-minute episodes. It says here, in the 6 programs, the topics range from the ancient Christian tradition of laying on of hands to the modern-day therapies such as Reich, and from the Oriental healing arts to psychic and spiritual healing as Australians practice it. The series offers insights into the areas of alternative health therapies. Narrator Neville Jury is a journalist who has been involved with alternative medicine for the last 12 years. That's interesting. I don't remember it at the time. And a quick look on YouTube reveals nothing. Not that show, which doesn't surprise me from a show published, or broadcast, I should say, in 1983. Maybe there's another avenue that might be very interesting to view some of that show. Anyway, let's get back to the review. The chiropractor among them, a jolly fellow who might easily have been a brewer or a butcher, bulging as he did with the muscles of his trade, didn't just look different. He acted differently, almost bursting into song to find that his patient's knee jerked when he tapped it with his mallet. Good, excellent, he caroled, wreathed in smiles of the sort I've never seen on my doctor's face. My doctor tends to look careworn and solemn, no doubt the result of guarding his speech, his expression, and probably his feelings for 30 years. Some massive effort in self-discipline, like losing 39 kilograms in weight, might provoke a brief nod of approval from him, but there is no way an involuntary reflex like a knee jerk would make me dux of his surgery. Obviously, when a practitioner finds joy so readily as Neville Jury's chiropractor, he is going to generate optimism and well-being in the patient, who probably enters his rooms feeling a complete physiological incompetent, especially now the trend is to blame ourselves for our nutmeg-sized gallstones, cancers, ulcers, and the rest. But when the alternative patient lies on his back and responds to the chiropractor's questions, no matter what he answers, he gets praise. He's in a no-lose situation. He couldn't ask for better. Similarly, the iridologist of the Eyes Have It school, interviewed by Neville Jury, looked more like a sweet shop lady than a healer, warm and comforting, ready with her all-day sucker. "Tell me," she invited her young male patient, "are you happy with your life?" There's only one answer to a question like that, and it's generally lengthy. The reason why orthodox doctors prefer instead to ask you where it hurts. Apart from looking different, alternative medicos talk differently. They talk a lot too. If it's not praising your reflexes, it's demonstrating your illnesses from skeletons or from pictures of your iris, of which we viewers got discomforting close-ups, some with dirty brown blobs on them, others with jagged black lines radiating from the hub, and everything hinting at some pretty sinister disease. A third thing emerging from the program on New Healers is that alternative medicos don't flinch from venturing into ethics. Their evangelism is underlined with "you oughts," in quotation marks. You oughts. They tell you boldly you ought to alter your lifestyle, whereas orthodox docs would hardly know what your lifestyle is. They'll tell you you're not living the right way, that goodness is somehow connected with good health. "To thine own self be true," they harp, and they're prepared to help you find that self. Every man, in quotation marks, they assure you, "we will go with thee and be thy guide, in thy most needs by thy side." Indeed, in the program, we saw a healer solacing a woman lying on the floor in a fetal position, gasping painfully while she went through the process of rebirth, purging herself, so, she told us later, of ancient resentments and anger. Not surprisingly, some of the new healers long for the ease of belonging. "We're orthodox," the chiropractor asserts firmly. "We use x-rays, we take blood tests, we study physiology, anatomy." Certainly, though the program didn't touch on this, Australian chiropractors have been making vigorous efforts to hogtie their members, straitjacketing them in a code with the usual professional objectives of controlling the quality and quantity of people wanting to take up the craft. Jury's program, however, at least this first one in the series, set out only to visualize those vague notions of alternative medicine held by the population at large. Those who think chiropractors fiddle about with the neck and jerk the limbs about saw just that. Acupuncturists stick needles into people, and that's what they did on the show. Encounter therapists have people writhing about on the floor and weeping, and nutritionalists give you bean sprouts. They all did what they ought. There were testimonials by satisfied patients, and that was that. The question implied in healers, quacks, or mystics was never tackled. Nor, apart from labeling the alternatives as holistic, which means holy, spelt with a W, and not holy, spelt with an H, was any attempt made to examine the rationale underlying the various approaches. But perhaps all that is to come. So there we go, a very interesting review which has whetted my appetite. I'd love to see the show. Made over 40 years ago. Wouldn't that be interesting? Now, this was part one of a little look into random alternative medicine as published in the pages of Australian newspapers in the Trove segment. Next week, we'll continue with part two, and that promises to include homeopathy. And don't forget, no matter where you are in the world, you can run to your computer, go to trove.nla.gov.au, type in a search criteria, and you'll never know. I will never know. The person down the street will never know. We all will never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Next week, the show will be coming to you once again from the San Francisco Bay Area, and I particularly look forward to catching up with my dear, dear friend, Dr. Eugenie Scott. Maybe I can convince her to do an interview for me about one of her pet topics, the ongoing battle against the forces of darkness when it comes to fighting the creationists. Oh, and Jeannie, if you're listening, don't worry, I am bringing over the Tim Tams. As I mentioned before, coming up on next week's show will be part 2 of the Trove series dealing with alternative medicine. And that will be episode 799, so I will be getting ready for episode 800. But now it's time for me to pack up the studio a little bit, put the microphones away so they don't get dusty, and pack my bags because I'll be flying out in a couple of days to cool, crisp, I hope, California. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for episodes and show notes with links going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone on Facebook, X, TikTok and YouTube by clicking the links at our homepage, together with links to support the show financially via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed by our guests are not necessarily those of the Skeptic Zone podcast or any other skeptical organisation.
Hello to all the people and Susan Gerbic who listen after the music for the dice game. What's that? Is that another aircraft? One just flew over. I thought the wheels would touch the top of the studio. I tell you, sometimes I wish they would take the birds with them. You know, very loud birds here sometimes. Anyway, it's time for the dice game. For those of you who don't know, every week, or most weeks, I guess, I roll a 10-sided die. Sometimes it's a different one. Maybe I should roll a different one. Hang on. You go over to the other side of the studio where I keep all this stuff. Somewhere here, I've got... here we go. Where are we? Oh, a big box of many different configurations. D20s, D30, D60. Delightful. All right.